Velazee had never seen a human before. Not in person, at least. They were always a distant concept. Tiny, inefficient creatures spoken of in war briefings with the same level of concern one might give to a mild planetary disturbance. A nuisance at best. A temporary obstacle at worst. The Dominion had categorized them long ago. Weak physiology, primitive technology, slow reflexes. And yet, here she was, standing on the edge of a battlefield, watching a lone human defy every single fact she had been taught. The smell of burning metal and scorched earth clung to the air, a signature of the Dominion's typical method of planetary subjugation. The sky above was split with the streaks of energy fire, plasma rounds carving neon ribbons through the darkness. Victory was, as always, inevitable. Until it wasn't. The human had been pinned down for nearly 10 minutes now, an eternity in combat terms. He had no energy shield, no cybernetic enhancements, no quantum displacement matrix to slip between dimensions like a proper soldier. He had only that ridiculous, outdated weapon, a kinetic firearm, a thing from the past, the kind of weapon museum curators would gawk at, the kind children would scoff at when they learned about the evolution of warfare. And yet, the human was still standing. Velazee narrowed her eyes through the heads-up display of her helmet. The tactical readout confirmed that at least 4 Dominion warriors had already engaged him. Each of them was faster, stronger, and strategically superior in every conceivable way. But they had still fallen. And then, as if the universe wanted to personally insult her intelligence, the human did something absurd. He stood up, in the middle of a war zone. Velazee felt her mandibles twitch in irritation. Is he malfunctioning? Do humans not understand the concept of cover? A single plasma round hissed past his head, nearly singing his unprotected skin. He didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just stretched, rolled his shoulders, and adjusted the strap of his rifle. Then he muttered something. Her helmet's translator barely caught it. All right, let's see if I still got it. Still got what? Then he fired. One shot. A crude, ugly thing. It didn't glow, didn't crackle with energy, didn't distort the very air around it like Dominion weaponry. Just a metal slug, propelled by sheer combustion. It shouldn't have mattered. And yet, Velazee watched in silent, horrified fascination as that single bullet traveled an impossible distance. It twisted through the air like a living thing, threading between falling debris, passing through the aftershock of an explosion, compensating for the changing gravity of the battlefield. Her HUD frantically calculated the trajectory. It didn't make sense. No mechanical targeting system could have adjusted that fast. No predictive AI could have calculated those microsecond shifts. Then the bullet hit its mark. A Dominion elite, a warrior who had stood undefeated in over 100 skirmishes, jerked back violently as the projectile punched through his energy shield like it was paper. The impact sent a shockwave through his suit, disabling its internal dampeners, causing him to crumple before he could even process what had happened. Silence fell over the battlefield. For the first time in years, Velazee felt something new. Uncertainty. This wasn't possible. She activated her comlink. Squad leader, report. There was no response. The only sound was the crackling static of the fallen warrior's disabled suit. The human, meanwhile, casually ejected the spent round from his rifle. He whistled. Damn! I thought I missed. Velazee's claws tightened. He thought he missed? She activated her helmet's zoom function, magnifying his expression. There was no fear, no desperation, just a lazy, almost bored amusement. As if this was just another day for him. That's when the second absurd thing happened. The Dominion reinforcements arrived. A full squad, bristling with energy weapons and armor that could withstand a direct impact from a railgun. The kind of force that could raise a city in under an hour. The human looked up, saw them, and sighed. Ah, crap. Then, as if the universe itself was trying to humiliate her species, he smiled. Not the kind of smile warriors gave before a final stand. Not the grim acceptance of a soldier who knew death was coming. This was something else. This was the smile of a man who wasn't worried. Velazi's entire understanding of human weakness had just been shattered. And somehow, she had the distinct and unsettling feeling that this was just the beginning. Jack Carter had been in a lot of bad situations before. This was definitely in the top 5. He stood on the edge of the battlefield, watching as a fresh squad of very angry-looking alien warriors advanced toward him in that slow, menacing way that heavily armored soldiers do when they think they've already won. His rifle was down to its last round. His backup weapon? Also out of ammo? His emergency combat knife? Currently embedded in the last guy he took down. So, yeah, bad situation. Jack let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, this is gonna suck. Across the field, Captain Velazi watched him with laser focus. She was still reeling from what she had just seen. A human, a species deemed too slow, too primitive, too weak, had just outshot one of the Dominion's finest warriors with nothing but an antique rifle and what appeared to be sheer arrogance. And now he was smiling at an entire squad of heavily armed Dominion elites. That was a good try, buddy. Velazi blinked. The other Dominion elites hesitated. The human had no weapons, no shields, no armor enhancements, and yet, in less than 5 seconds, he had humiliated one of their own. Jack cracked his knuckles. All right, who's next? Velazi's mind raced. This isn't possible. Humans don't move like this. She had studied their physiology. They were too slow, too fragile. And yet, this one was weaving through trained Dominion warriors like he had been fighting them his entire life. One of the elites snapped. He rushed forward, plasma blade igniting in a brilliant arc of blue energy. He swung at Jack's midsection, a slash that should have cut the human in half. Jack didn't dodge. Instead, he did something worse. He caught the alien's wrist mid-swing. Velazi actually gasped. Jack twisted, using leverage and body weight to redirect the momentum. The elite flew over his own blade, crashing into the dirt. Jack turned to the remaining warriors. Look, fellas, I get it. You're all trying really hard. But he gestured to the 2 groaning soldiers on the ground. Maybe you want to call it quits before things get embarrassing? The Dominion squad leader, furious, humiliated, let out a guttural growl. You are nothing, Jack smirked. I don't know, man. I feel like I'm at least a little something. Then the squad leader raised his arm and activated his suit's gravitic pulse. A high-pitched hum filled the air. The human had no chance. The pulse slammed into Jack like a meteor, lifting him off his feet and hurling him backwards across the battlefield. He hit the ground hard, rolling several times before slamming into a chunk of debris. Velazi clenched her jaw. That's it. That has to be it. The dust settled. Jack groaned. His voice was muffled. Ugh. Okay. Ow. He sat up. Velazi's stomach dropped. Jack cracked his neck, rubbing the back of his head. You know, that really hurt. I mean, wow, my chiropractor's gonna be pissed. The squad leader stared. Jack got to his feet. The entire battlefield went silent. And then he grinned. All right, my turn. Velazi had no idea what was about to happen next. But she was certain of one thing. The Dominion's assumption about human weakness? It was dead wrong. Velazy was beginning to suspect she had been lied to her entire life. The human was still standing, after a gravitic pulse. That was not normal. That was not how things were supposed to go. She had seen lesser species break apart under that kind of force, literally. And yet, Jack Carter stood there, dusting himself off like he had tripped on the sidewalk rather than been blasted across the battlefield. The Dominion squad, who just minutes ago had moved with the assured confidence of elite warriors, were now hesitant. One of them shifted their stance. Another clenched his fists. Jack rolled his shoulders, stretching his arms. Whew! All right. Now that we've established you guys hit like an angry massage chair, can we maybe talk this out? Silence. Jack sighed. Yeah, didn't think so. Velazy couldn't believe it. He wasn't scared, not even a little. He was having fun. And somehow, that unsettled her more than anything else. Then, before her squad leader could react, Jack moved. One moment, he was standing in the wreckage. The next, he was inside their formation. The first Dominion warrior barely had time to react before Jack slammed a fist into his helmet. Not a wild punch, but a targeted strike, right where the armor's kinetic dampeners were weakest. The impact sent the warrior stumbling back, dazed. The second elite lunged. Too slow. Jack sidestepped, tripped the alien mid-step, and let him fall into his own squadmate. Velazy's mind raced. How? How? This wasn't human combat doctrine. This was something else. Something instinctual. The squad leader growled, raising his plasma rifle. Jack moved first. With a fluid, impossible motion, he twisted into the warrior's guard, ripping the rifle from his grip before the trigger could be pulled. For a long, quiet second, Jack just held the weapon. The entire battlefield froze. Jack looked down at the rifle in his hands. Then he looked up at the squad leader. And then, in the most infuriating, condescending, soul-crushing moment of the battle, Jack tossed the weapon over his shoulder with a shrug. The squad leader snapped. He lunged, plasma blade igniting in fury, and Jack was already behind him. No one saw how he moved, not even Velazy. All they saw was Jack Carter standing where the squad leader had been. And the squad leader? Flat on his back, unconscious. Jack exhaled, rubbing his neck. Man, I really thought you guys would put up more of a fight. A long, stunned silence followed. Then, laughter. Velazy didn't even realize it was her own. She hadn't laughed in years. Not in combat. Not in training. But something about this ridiculous, impossible human made it happen. Jack grinned. Hey, I got one! Finally! I was starting to think you guys were humor impaired. Velazy stepped forward. Human. Jack turned to her, curious. Captain Mandibles, what's up? She narrowed her eyes. You are not normal. Yeah, I get that a lot. You shouldn't be able to do what you just did. Technically, no, but I've got a talent for ignoring physics when it's inconvenient. Velazy studied him. He was grinning, sure, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't just fast. He was thinking 5 moves ahead. And that was dangerous. She folded her arms. A test, then. Jack raised an eyebrow. Oh, I like where this is going. If you can replicate that impossible shot you made earlier, she said, slow and deliberate, I will personally bring this to the Dominion War Council. Jack paused. For the first time since this started, she saw a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. Then he smirked. All right, but if I do, you owe me a drink. Velazy frowned. Drink? Yeah, a beverage, alcohol, or whatever you guys drink to celebrate humiliating yourselves in combat. Velazy sighed. Fine. Jack grinned. Oh, Captain Mandibles, You are so gonna regret that. Vela Z had the distinct unsettling feeling that she already did. Vela Z had spent her life following one unwavering truth. The Dominion was superior. Its warriors were the pinnacle of evolution. Its technology was unmatched. Its conquest was inevitable. And yet, here she was, standing in the middle of a ruined battlefield, watching a single human casually check the wind with his finger before lining up the most impossible shot of his life. Jack Carter had taken up position atop a chunk of broken Dominion machinery, the setting sun casting an almost dramatic glow behind him. His rifle, the same outdated, ridiculous projectile weapon, rested lazily in his hands like he had all the time in the world. The target was an impossible distance away. A single, tiny floating drone, barely visible to the naked eye. Vela Z folded her arms. "You miss, and you owe me a proper explanation." Jack smirked. "And if I don't miss, you still owe me an explanation. But now I owe you a drink." He grinned. "I like those odds." The Dominion warriors still standing, bruised, confused, and reconsidering their entire species' stance on humanity, watched in silence. Jack exhaled. His body relaxed in a way that sent a strange shiver down Vela Z's spine. It was like he wasn't just aiming, he was becoming part of the shot. And then, crack. The gunshot was almost anticlimactic. No energy pulse, no plasma explosion, just a simple, sharp crack that echoed across the wasteland. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the drone, the one that had been hovering so far away it was practically a speck, dropped like a stone. Vela Z's brain stopped working. Jack stood up, stretching. "Welp, looks like I win." The silence was deafening. One of the Dominion soldiers just sat down. Another shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. Vela Z, to her horror, realized her mandibles were slightly open. In shock. Jack saw, and grinned. "Aw, Cap, don't look so surprised. I told you, I never miss." Vela Z snapped her mouth shut, furious at herself. "Explain," Jack chuckled. "What, the shot? That was easy. All I had to do was calculate wind resistance, gravity, temperature shifts, barrel heat, and—" He waved a hand. "Honestly, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." "I already don't believe you." Jack sighed, shaking his head. "You know, for a species that's supposed to be hyper-intelligent, you guys are real bad at handling stuff that doesn't fit in your little superior race narrative." Vela Z bristled. "The Dominion is still superior." Jack laughed. A full, genuine, amused-as-hell laugh. "Oh, Cap, you are adorable." Vela Z hated how much that irritated her. Jack slung his rifle over his shoulder, stepping closer. "Look, I get it. Your people spent, what? Centuries? Millennia? Convincing themselves that humans were weak? So when one of us rolls up and starts handing out free combat lessons, it shakes your worldview a little." Vela Z narrowed her eyes. "Are all humans like you?" Jack snorted. "Hell no. Most humans wouldn't have made it past the first round. But the thing is, you don't know which ones will." That bothered her. Vela Z had always operated on certainty. Dominion superiority was a fact, but Jack Carter was a variable, unpredictable, unquantifiable. How many more of him were out there? She shook her head. "This doesn't change the Dominion's stance on humanity." Jack grinned. "Oh, sure it does. You just don't know it yet." Vela Z hated that he was probably right. With a sigh, she signaled her squad. "We're leaving." Jack blinked. "That's it? No dramatic last-ditch fight? No, I'll get you next time human speech? I am a captain, not a cartoon villain." Jack smirked. "Could have fooled me." Vela Z ignored him, turning toward her ship. But before she could take a step, Jack cleared his throat. Excuse me, but I believe somebody owes me a drink." Velazee froze. The Dominion squad turned to her. "Waiting." Jack just stood there, grinning like a smug bastard. Her mandibles twitched. "Fine," Jack whooped. The soldiers stared in horror. Velazee sighed. She had no idea what she had just unleashed, but she had the distinct feeling this wasn't the last she'd see of Jack Carter. And that thought was far more terrifying than losing a battle.